Imagine you wake up tomorrow and every single thing you've built your life around, your phone, your job, your Netflix subscription, your carefully curated coffee order, just vanishes. No cities, no electricity, no GPS telling you to turn left in 300 feet. Just you, the wilderness, and the very primal question of whether or not you'd survive past Tuesday. Most of us, we'd be cooked, literally and figuratively, because we also don't know how to make fire. But here's the thing, there are people alive on this planet right now who would laugh at that scenario. Not because it's funny, but because that's just Wednesday for them. These are communities, tribes, entire civilizations that never plugged into the modern world. And before you picture some romanticized National Geographic fantasy, let's be clear, these are real, breathing, thriving human beings with complex languages, political structures, spiritual systems, and social rules that would make your HOA look like a suggestion box. So buckle up because we're going on a trip, no passport required, to meet the ancient human tribes that still walk this earth today. We're starting in the Andaman Islands, a remote archipelago sitting in the Bay of Bengal between India and Southeast Asia. It's gorgeous out there. Turquoise water, dense jungle, the kind of place that travel influencers would absolutely ruin if they could get close enough. They can't, because on one of those islands, North Sentinel Island, specifically, lives a group of people known as the Sentinelese. And these folks have made it extremely clear that they want absolutely nothing to do with the outside world. Zero. None. Do not knock on their door. How clear? In 2006, 2 fishermen whose boat drifted too close to the island were killed. In 2018, an American missionary named John Allen Chow attempted to make contact. Against the law, against all advice, against basic survival instincts. And he didn't come back either. The Indian government, which technically administers the Andaman Islands, has wisely adopted a policy of, yeah, let's just leave them alone. And honestly, respect. The Sentinelese are believed to have lived on that island for somewhere between 50,000 and 60,000 years. Let that number sit in your brain for a second. 60,000 years. The Egyptian pyramids are about 4,500 years old. Rome at its peak was maybe 1,000 years of dominance. The Sentinelese have been doing their thing on that island for 60,000 years, and the last thing they need is some outsider showing up with a Bible and a GoPro. Their exact population is unknown. Estimates range from a few dozen to a few hundred. And their language has never been decoded, because no one has gotten close enough long enough to study it. What we do know is that they are skilled fishermen and hunters, they build outrigger canoes, and they have a very sophisticated understanding of their environment. They have survived tsunamis, colonial expeditions, and the general chaos of human history by doing the one thing most of us are terrible at, minding their own business. Now let's swing over to the Amazon rainforest, which, if the Sentinelese are the world's most famous isolated tribe, is basically the world's largest collection of other isolated tribes. Brazil's National Indian Foundation, known as FUNAI, estimates that there are around 100 uncontacted or barely contacted tribes living in the Amazon basin today. 100. That's not a rounding error. That's a deliberate lifestyle choice made by people who have, in many cases, seen what happens when the outside world shows up and decided that they would very much prefer it did not. Among the most discussed of these is a group referred to as the Man of the Hole, though in 2022, that story took a deeply somber turn. For decades, FUNAI officials had been tracking signs of a lone indigenous man living in the Brazilian state of Rondônia. He was the last known survivor of his tribe, which had been massacred in the late 20th century by ranchers and land grabbers. He lived completely alone for over 26 years, building huts, digging holes, hence the name, and rejecting all attempts at contact. When they found him deceased in his hammock in August 2022, he had painted himself with red paint and his body was surrounded by feathers. He had lived alone as the last of his kind for more than a quarter century. And if that doesn't hit you somewhere, deep in your chest, check your pulse. But the Amazon is also home to tribes with more members, more ongoing life, more stories still being written. The Kawahiva are a nomadic group so elusive that FUNAI has only brief video footage of them, shot in 1998, running through the forest. They are believed to move constantly to avoid contact, and their territory is being rapidly consumed by illegal logging and agricultural expansion. Brazil has legal protections in place for these people, but enforcing those protections in the middle of an enormous rainforest against people with economic incentives to ignore the law is complicated. The Yanomami, while not entirely uncontacted, are one of the largest relatively isolated indigenous groups in the world, roughly 35,000 people spread across the Venezuela-Brazil border. They live in large communal structures called llanos or chabonos, practice a complex spiritual system that involves communicating with spirits called xapiri, and have a social structure that anthropologists have spent decades trying to fully understand. They also recently made international headlines because illegal gold miners, garimpeiros, had been invading their territory. bringing disease, violence, and environmental destruction. In 2023, the Brazilian government declared a public health emergency for the Yanomami territory. These are not people frozen in amber. They are living communities fighting very modern threats. Let's cross an ocean. In the dense forests of Central Africa, specifically in the Democratic Republic of Congo and neighboring countries, the Mbuti people have called the Ituri rainforest home for what researchers believe could be 30,000 years or more, making them one of the oldest indigenous populations in Africa. The Mbuti are often referred to as pygmies, a term that's increasingly considered offensive by the people themselves. And they are known for their extraordinary relationship with the forest. Not relationship in a metaphorical sense, in a deeply practical, spiritual, and ecological sense. The Mbuti believe the forest is a living being, a father and mother figure that provides everything they need. Their music, particularly a form of polyphonic singing called molimo, is performed to wake up the forest when something goes wrong. Imagine your coping mechanism for hard times being to gather your community and sing in such complex, interwoven harmonies that ethnomusicologists still struggle to notate it properly. The Mbuti are hunter-gatherers. The men hunt with nets and bows, the women gather plants and roots, and children are involved in community life from an early age. Their camps are temporary. They move through the forest in patterns that allow the ecosystem to recover. They were doing sustainable resource management before it was a TED Talk topic. They also have a playful, humor-filled culture, and their social structure is famously egalitarian. Decisions are made communally, disputes are often resolved through ridicule rather than punishment, which, if you think about it, is kind of brilliant. Nothing corrects behavior faster than your whole community making fun of you for a week, and there is no formal chief or hierarchy. Power as a concept is treated with deep suspicion. Now, here's one you probably didn't expect. The Korowai of Papua, Indonesia. The Korowai are famous for one very specific architectural choice. They build their homes in the treetops, not a few feet off the ground. We're talking structures 15 to 50 meters up in the rainforest canopy. Some reports claim even higher. Their reason, historically, was protection from a group of spirits called Laleo, demonic entities that walk on the ground. Whether you interpret that spiritually or practically, keeping enemies and wildlife at bay, the engineering is remarkable. They build these structures with no formal training, using materials from the forest, and they hold. People live in them. Children grow up in them. Grandparents get old in them, up in the trees. The Korowai were essentially unknown to the outside world until 1974, when Dutch missionaries made contact. Since then, some Korowai communities have had increasing interaction with the outside world, including through documentary filmmakers. But deeper communities remain largely isolated, and the tension between preservation and curiosity is very real out there. What makes the Korowai particularly fascinating is the complexity of their oral tradition and their cosmological worldview. They have detailed origin stories, sophisticated knowledge of the forest ecosystem, and social rules governing marriage, kinship, and community responsibility that have been passed down without a written language for generations. Their entire civilization exists in human memory. Every elder that dies takes an irreplaceable library with them. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Let's talk about the Jarawa, and this one gets complicated. Also from the Andaman Islands, the Jarawa were, until the 1990s, fiercely hostile to outsiders in a way that rivaled their Sentinelese neighbors. Then, in 1998, something shifted. A small group of Jarawa made contact with the Indian Coast Guard, and gradually, the community began allowing limited interaction. What happened next is a cautionary tale. Tourists started coming. Tour operators began running illegal human safaris, yes, that's the actual term used, along a road that cuts through Jarawa territory, where people would throw food at Jarawa individuals like they were animals in a zoo. Videos surfaced. Outrage followed. The Indian Supreme Court banned these tours. Enforcement has been spotty. The Jarawa population, currently estimated at around 250 to 400 people, has been caught in a brutal transition zone. They now have some knowledge of the outside world, have adopted certain outside goods, metal tools, some processed foods, but remain vulnerable to diseases they have no immunity to, a problem that has wiped out other Andaman tribes before. The Great Andamanese, once thousands of people with 10 distinct language groups, now number fewer than 60. The Bo language, the last language of one of those groups, went extinct in 2010 when its last speaker, Boa Sr., passed away at approximately 85 years old. She had spent her final years as the only person on Earth who spoke her mother tongue. Let that image settle. Heading to Africa again, specifically to Tanzania and Kenya, the Hadza. The Hadza are one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer societies on Earth, and they hold a distinction that makes geneticists and anthropologists lose sleep in the most excited way possible. They are genetically one of the most distinct human populations alive, representing one of the earliest divergences in the human family tree. When scientists say ancient, they mean it. The Hadza have lived around Lake Eyasi in the Great Rift Valley for tens of thousands of years, and their lifestyle, foraging, hunting, moving with the seasons, has remained remarkably consistent. There are roughly 1,000 to 1,300 Hadza people today, though only about 300 to 400 still live the traditional hunter-gatherer life full-time. They have no chiefs, no formal hierarchy. Every individual, including women, participates in decision-making. Their shelters are simple dome structures that can be built in a few hours. They move camp frequently. They eat what the land gives them: honey, berries, tubers, birds, animals, and here's the wild part: they're happy. Multiple well-being studies have found that the Hadza report high levels of life satisfaction. They sleep when they want, eat when they find food, spend significant time socializing, storytelling, and playing. The concept of debt or future financial anxiety essentially doesn't exist. Their average daily caloric intake fluctuates, sure, but their stress hormones, measured in some studies, are significantly lower than those of people in industrialized nations. Make of that what you will. The Hadza language is a click language, incorporating distinct clicking sounds as consonants, and it's what linguists call a language isolate, meaning it has no known relationship to any other language family on Earth. It didn't evolve from any other known language. It didn't borrow from any neighboring tongue in any traceable way. It is, linguistically speaking, alone, ancient, a window into the deep past of human communication, sitting there in Tanzania, being spoken right now, today. Papua New Guinea deserves its own documentary series, honestly, but for now, let's zoom in on one group, the Dani people of the Baliem Valley. The Dani were so isolated in the highlands of what was then Dutch New Guinea that when American journalist Richard Archbold flew over the Baliem Valley in 1938, he discovered a population of approximately 50,000 to 100,000 people that the outside world had no record of. Hidden by mountains, unknown to colonizers, to cartographers, to everyone. An entire civilization sitting there in a fertile valley, farming sweet potatoes with sophisticated irrigation systems, building watchtowers, waging ritualized warfare, raising pigs as currency and status symbols, completely invisible to modernity until a plane happened to fly over. The Dani practice a form of mourning that involves cutting off finger joints. Women who lose a close family member would have a joint removed as a physical expression of grief. This practice has become less common in younger generations, but many older Dani women still carry the marks. Their pigs are treated with extraordinary care, almost like family members, and pig wealth is the backbone of Dani's social economy. Today, the Dani still inhabit the Baliem Valley, and the city of Wamena has grown up around them. Some Dani have integrated significantly into Indonesian society. Others maintain traditional practices. The Baliem Valley Festival, held annually, is a remarkable showcase of traditional Dani culture, including mock warfare, traditional dress, and music. Though there's always the tense question of whether cultural festivals preserve culture or slowly turn it into performance. Crossing to South America once more, deep into the forests of Paraguay and Brazil, we find the Ayoreo Toto Biegosode. These are people who are, right now, in 2024, actively choosing to avoid contact with the outside world. They are not historical. They are present, and the threat against them is immediate. The Gran Chaco, the forest they inhabit, is being destroyed at one of the fastest rates of deforestation in the world. Cattle ranching, soy farming, and road construction are consuming their territory with alarming speed. Several Ayoreo groups made contact in the 1990s and early 2000s, often under traumatic circumstances, essentially forced out of the forest by machines and chainsaws. Members of those contacted groups have actually been sending messages into the forest, begging their still isolated relatives to remain hidden because they've seen what contact can bring. When you think about that, contacted people telling their uncontacted family stay away, it's not worth it. Something shifts in how you understand the modern world. Usually we're sold the story that modernity is the destination, the upgrade, the thing everyone wants if they just had access. The Ayoreo situation quietly but forcefully challenges that narrative. Over in India's Odisha state, the Dongria Kond have become globally known for a fight that sounds like it was written by a screenwriter who wanted a clear moral arc. A tribe of indigenous people versus a massive multinational mining corporation. The Dongria Kond, who number around 8,000 people, live in and around the Nyamgiri Hills, which they consider sacred, the home of their deity, Nyam Raja. In the 2000s, British mining company Vedanta Resources proposed to mine bauxite from those hills. What followed was a decade-long legal and activist battle, involving the Dongria Kond themselves, environmental groups, and eventually the Indian Supreme Court, which ruled in 2013 that the Dongria Kond had the right to decide their own fate. In village meetings, the Gram Sabha, community members voted overwhelmingly to reject the mine. They won. A group of 8,000 people, with no army, no corporate lobbyist, no billion-dollar legal team, went up against a global mining corporation and won through sheer community organization, legal persistence, and, crucially, international attention. The Dongria Kond story is one of the most powerful examples of indigenous land rights in action in the 21st century. Their traditional way of life involves farming millet and hunting in the forest, but it's their intimate knowledge of the Nyamgiri Hills ecosystem that makes them its best possible stewards. They know every plant, every season, every water source. That knowledge took generations to accumulate. A mine would have erased it in years. The Onge, also from the Andaman Islands, the Andamans are doing the most in terms of ancient human presence, are one of the most tragic cases of what happens when contact goes wrong. Once spread across Little Andaman Island with a population of several hundred, the Onge now number around 100 people, confined to 2 small reservations. Contact with the British in the 19th century, followed by Indian settlement. After independence, decimated their population. They lost territory, lost community members to disease, lost the social fabric that holds any group together. Today, there are serious concerns about whether the Onge community will survive as a cultural entity within another generation. What's haunting about the Onge situation is not that it happened in some distant, cruel past. It is living memory. People alive today watched their community shrink from something vital into something fragile. Their language is critically endangered. Their traditional practices are eroding. The mechanisms that caused this, land loss, disease, dependency on outside food supplies, are not ancient history. They're recent decisions made by identifiable governments and institutions. The Onge remind us that contact is not a single moment. It's a process, and the long tail of that process can span generations. Let's end somewhere that reshapes the frame entirely. The San people, sometimes called Bushmen, though many consider that term outdated, of the Kalahari Desert region in southern Africa are often described as the world's oldest indigenous population. Genetic studies have placed their ancestors at the very root of the modern human family tree. Some researchers suggest that the San represent a lineage stretching back 100,000 years or more. If modern humans are a tree, the San might be the taproot. There are an estimated 90,000 to 100,000 San people today, living across Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Angola. Their history is layered with tragedy: colonial dispossession, forced relocation, discrimination, and the loss of hunting rights that were foundational to their culture. But it's also a story of persistence and adaptation that is humbling. The San are known for tracking skills that border on the mythological to outside observers. They can follow a trail across rocky ground, read the way a blade of grass has bent, identify an animal by the depth of its print and the weight distribution. Conservationists have actually begun formally partnering with sand trackers for anti-poaching efforts and wildlife monitoring, because no technology replicates what generations of ecological knowledge produces in the human brain. Their rock art, painted across the caves and overhangs of southern Africa, is among the oldest and most widespread art tradition on Earth. Some of it dates back tens of thousands of years, and it's not decorative, it's a record. Cosmology, medicine, hunting technique, social history, encoded in ochre and charcoal on rock faces, an archive without a building. The San also have a healing dance tradition, the trance dance, where healers enter a state of altered consciousness to diagnose and treat illness, channel spiritual energy, and maintain the community's connection to the spirit world. This is not metaphor or performance for them. It is medicine. It is maintenance of something essential. And here's the part that tends to make people go quiet. Many San people today navigate between worlds. They might wear modern clothes, use cell phones, interact with tourism or conservation industries, and also perform the trance dance, speak a click language, and carry knowledge systems in their minds that no university has yet found a way to fully document. That is the reality of these communities broadly. They are not museum pieces. They are not frozen. They are people managing the extraordinary tension of being ancient in a world that keeps insisting on newness. Here's what all of these groups share and why their existence matters beyond being interesting content for curious people on the internet. Every one of these tribes carries knowledge. Not primitive knowledge. The framing is wrong and worth abandoning immediately. Complex, sophisticated, accumulated knowledge about ecosystems, medicine, social organization, conflict resolution, and the human relationship with the natural world. Knowledge that, in many cases, took tens of thousands of years to develop and refine. We are in an era where biodiversity is collapsing, where mental health crises are escalating in industrialized societies at staggering rates, where climate change is forcing a rethink of humanity's relationship with the planet. And scattered across the globe, living in rainforests and deserts and island jungles, are communities of people who have solved, in their own contexts, many of the problems we're frantically trying to solve with apps and summits and think pieces. The Mbuti's sustainable resource management, the Hadza's community well-being structure, the San's ecological knowledge, the Dongria Kond's model of land stewardship. None of these are curiosities. They are data points from a long experiment in human survival. The question of whether these communities should remain isolated or integrated is not ours to answer. The Sentinelese have answered it. The uncontacted Ayoreo are answering it right now with their feet, moving deeper into the forest. Other communities are choosing different paths, integrating on their own terms, at their own pace, in their own ways. What the rest of the world owes them, at minimum, is the space to make that choice. And maybe, just maybe, a little more curiosity about what they know that we've forgotten. Because somewhere on North Sentinel Island, a group of people who have outlasted every empire, every plague, every colonial project, every technological revolution, every trend cycle are going about their Wednesday. And they are, by any meaningful measure, doing just fine.